This is WPSL Port St. Lucie.
The opinions on this program are those of the program host and guest and not necessarily those of WPSL. WPSL does not endorse products that may be mentioned. Any reproduction or retransmission of this broadcast is strictly prohibited without written consent of WPSL. Legal questions? Ask a lawyer. Give us a call at 340-1590, 340-1590 here at the studios of WPSL. And Ask a Lawyer with your host, attorney Stuart M. Address.
Good morning, Treasure Coast. This is Stuart Address, and this is Ask a Lawyer. I'm here for you to call in and ask me any legal questions you may have. Maybe you have a case. Maybe somebody's threatening to sue you. We're here. Give us a call, and if I can help you, I'll try. And if I don't know, if it's not my subject area, I'll tell you that too. Anyway, I hope you're all getting ready for a wonderful long weekend, a Labor Day weekend. It's also a solemn weekend, and that's what we're going to devote our show to today. This is the weekend that Senator John McCain is finally laid to rest. He's lying in state right now in the United States Capitol. And tomorrow there will be a funeral service at the National Cathedral, in which President Obama and President Bush will both give eulogies. And then Senator McCain will be laid to rest at Annapolis, where he first trained to be an officer in the Navy. So why is this unabashed liberal Democrat devoting a show to a staunch conservative Republican like John McCain? Hopefully for the right reasons. And that is really, I think, the goal of today's show. Senator McCain happens to be an individual in whom I have always held in high regard. Certainly, I did not want him to become president when he ran against Barack Obama. But goodness, I would have been very happy if he had defeated George W. Bush for the Republican nomination 4 years earlier. I think he would have made probably an excellent president. Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. I, as a lawyer, would have had the same concerns with any Republican about nominations to the Supreme Court, but I have a funny feeling they would have been a lot more judicious.
Yeah, that would have, back then, though, it was not as big a topic.
You never know. It depends on when they die. You know.
But now, in present day, they're all a bit older.
That's true.
Yeah.
So why is it, that everywhere you go now, any station you listen to, everybody is extolling the virtues of John McCain? Why is it? I heard this last night on TV. I thought it was amusing. It's true. Why is it that right now you can turn on MSNBC, CNN, and Fox, and they're all covering the same story in the same way? Truly amazing. And it really has to do with who John McCain was as a man, as a senator. We won't go into as much today as a husband, as a father. But a number of people have already eulogized Senator McCain. Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, who was a good friend of John McCain's, took to the floor of the Senate the other day and spoke for quite a while in tears. Vice President Biden spoke the other day in Arizona while Senator McCain was lying in state in the Capitol there, and eulogized him. Obviously, I can't tell you anything about what President Obama and President Bush are going to say tomorrow because I'm not that good. But
John McCain had everything all planned, so
I can give you his own words.
John McCain probably knows what they're going to say.
Yes, well, probably.
He did before he left us.
We can also talk a little bit about Senator McCain's words. So I'm going to invite you not only to call in with questions at 340-1590, but as we're going through this, call in to talk about Senator McCain. Now, you don't have to love him. You can call in and ask me a question or just talk about him or something that struck you about him. Let's do the man an honor, a service during this hour, and let's remember him. And let's hopefully learn a little something And maybe just in one small way, each of us can be guided by whatever it is about Senator McCain that speaks to us. When Senator Lindsey Graham took to the floor of the Senate the other day, among the things he said are these: if you want to help the country, be more like John McCain. I believe there is a little John McCain in all of us. And a little John McCain practiced by a lot of people can make this a really great nation. What was he talking about? Well, he went on to explain in great detail what he was talking about. Senator Graham said, in tears, I do not cry for a perfect man. I cry for a man who had honor and always was willing to admit to his imperfection. Now, to me, that alone speaks volumes. Honestly, I have been preaching this to my 14-year-old son for as long as I can remember, that the essential values that I would like him to take into adulthood are honesty, integrity, and character. Everything else will follow. But if you don't have those characteristics, you will not be, in my view, very successful, and in any event, you will not be a great person. Senator Graham went on to say, the reason we are talking about him today, and the reason I'm crying, is because he was successful in spite of his failures. He taught me that principle and compromise are not mutually exclusive. To my friends on the other side, as long as I'm here, I'm going to remember that you have to get something too. Now, that is absolutely profound. For most of this nation's history, that is the way Congress worked. Perhaps not so much the House of Representatives, because it was designed by the framers to be a more raucous body representing the people. The Senate was designed to be a more deliberative body. And they were supposed to sit back, consider the positions on each side, regardless of party, and recognize that regardless of who was in power, in order to move legislation forward, you had to compromise. The other side had to get something to vote yes. The massive pieces of legislation that have been enacted in our nation in the last 50 years have been enacted with bipartisan support. Critical legislation. Civil rights legislation. Nothing can be done when one party in control, Republican or Democrat, takes the position, we're in control, we get it our way, and that's all there is to it. Because unless you're going to get that overwhelming supermajority in the House, and usually 60 votes in the Senate, doesn't happen very often, you cannot accomplish anything by yourself. And to try to steal away 1 or 2 measly votes from the other side, which is what happens now, doesn't work very well. It succeeds on occasion, but it leaves anger, rancor, bitterness, divisiveness, and no willingness to compromise the next time around. So, Senator McCain's belief in compromise, which he demonstrated over and over again. Senator McCain worked with Democratic Senator Russ Feingold on campaign finance reform. He worked with Senator Kennedy on health care reform. He worked with Joe Biden on a host of things. They were such close friends. This is why legislation was able to move forward. Because, as Senator McCain says, not as I say, when you were able to do battle on the floor and then go have lunch or go have drinks with your colleagues from the other side, you argued about the principles that you were both espousing, but you respected each other as people. And that led to better understanding and more success. And I will tell you as a lawyer, and I will admit it took me longer than it should have to learn this lesson, the better you get to know the attorneys in the community, the harder it is to fight with them, at least not unnecessarily. It is tough to be nasty to the extent beyond that in which you really have to advocate for your client with somebody you know. Much easier with somebody you don't know or somebody you despise. So let's talk about what Senator Graham continued to say. He taught me that honor and imperfection are always in competition. Honor is, in my view, doing the right thing at your own expense. And he did that time and time again. The right thing at your own expense. Sometimes doing what you know in your heart is correct, even though it might hurt you. What did he mean? Well, I don't have the quote here, but I've heard about him talking that sometimes you have to go to your own base and say no. It's not right. It's not what I'm going to do. And certainly Senator McCain did that. And he won all of his elections by more than 10 points. Some of them a lot more than 10 points. Sometimes you must go to the people that put you where you are and speak truth, even if it means you may lose the next election. Those who believe that their God-given right is to stay in the House or Senate and so are afraid to lose the next election do us a disservice because they cannot stand up for what they believe is right. Now, Senator Jeff Flake, who was another colleague, a Republican of Senator McCain, who was retiring, he said that John McCain was bigger than us all. His fidelity to that idea and his idealism in balancing fierce political battles with a determination to always see the good and find the humanity in his opponents is an example that transcended politics and made him the man he was. Repeated references by colleagues recognizing the necessity of respecting the positions of your adversaries. You may disagree with them, but respect them. I don't have the quote here, but another thing that Senator Graham said when he was speaking on the floor was that Senator McCain made clear that you cannot personally attack. And I think somebody else may have said it. Maybe it was Vice President Biden that we're going to get to. But that to do so undermines your ability to ever work with that person again. Nothing is bigger than that relationship. No individual piece of legislation. Just like for lawyers, we're trained. No one client, no one cause is worth sacrificing your self-respect, your honor, your integrity. It's what makes you who you are. And it is how it enables what others see in you. Now, before we get to Vice President Biden's eulogy, Mitt Romney also ran for president, colleague, former senator, Republican. He also spoke about John McCain, as has goodness knows how many people. And I'm going to read, it's relatively short, but I'm going to read exactly what he said. He said, John McCain defined a life of honor. Serving his country in an unpopular war, refusing preferential release from prison and torture, rejecting the opportunity directed by his supporter towards his political opponent, the opprobrium, that means the nastiness, directed by his supporter towards his political opponent, extolling the ascendancy of the first black president who had just defeated him, and voting his conscience in the face of his party's universal condemnation, integrity, duty, courage, and character combined in John McCain, a great and heroic man of honor who stood tallest in the United States Senate. I will miss a good friend. America will miss a giant among men. And what did Mitt Romney mean? We will get to that in a moment. We have Michael on line one. Hello, Michael. How are you?
Good, sir. Thank you. Yes, sir. I had a question regarding child support case.
Sure.
My question is, I've been paying child support for the last 10 years to my ex-wife. I had a contract that was done through a divorce. The contract went in front of a judge. And I'm paying directly this child support to her. And last 4 weeks, she opened a case of child support to another state. And so the state is asking Florida to enforce the case.
Okay.
So what happened now, Florida wants to basically change the rules to go through them to pay for the child support case.
Are you saying they want you to pay more child? Are you saying they want you to pay more child support?
Well, they want to adjust it. They want to adjust it to review it, and for me to pay through them, through the courts.
Well, the courts have the power certainly to have you pay through the courts. That's, always an option. In terms of adjusting it, it'll depend upon what that contract, as you call it, which went before a judge and became part of the judgment of dissolution, judgment ending the marriage. It will depend upon the language of those provisions regarding child support. If they provided that the child support could never be modified, then that's enforceable and it can't be modified. If it didn't, then the law provides for modification of child support if there's a substantial change in circumstances. And that is done by a petition. Now, it sounds like your ex-wife, now living out of state, filed an action in that state, probably alleging a change of circumstance. I don't know if you had notice of that or you defended against that, but overall, it's going to come down to what that contract in Florida says, that judgment, whether or not they can modify the child support.
I understand. Okay, so do you advise I should get an attorney for this, or just go by myself?
Oh, goodness, never. No, because there's a lot of money at stake. No, first of all, I think you need an attorney to look at the judgment of dissolution you have here in Florida, which will include that contract, and to advise you, first of all, whether or not there is any legal authority to modify the child support terms. If not, then you need to challenge what the other state did and is asking Florida to do, because it's contrary to the judgment of dissolution in Florida.
Does that make it more complicated for him that it's another state?
Well, no, because, all the states have passed a statute, that gives, uniform enforcement of child support, and, there's full faith and credit of every state's judgments. So it's just, you're allowed to file wherever you live, at least for a certain period of time.
Okay.
His ex-wife filed where she is. That court should have honored whatever it is that the Florida judgment said. Now, if the Florida judgment didn't preclude modification, then it was correct in having a hearing on modification, but not without notification to Michael and an opportunity, I don't know if you're still on the line, for you to get counsel or to defend against it. And if you didn't have notice and there's been a modification, then I would suggest it needs to be challenged.
I understand. Okay, I shall thank you, and I will be looking for an attorney.
Very welcome.
Well, you handle divorce, right?
I do some divorce. I could certainly look at that contract for you if you'd like to call Cheryl at our office, which is 781-8003. Tried not to plug myself on.
Well, I wouldn't let you get away with that.
But feel free to call my office or anybody else. It's your choice.
Okay, I sure thank you, sir.
Very welcome. Bye-bye.
Now, in that same contract, would there be, how does your ex just pick up and take your kid to another state?
Well, I don't know. Did he say the kid? I mean, that may have been.
Oh, no, he didn't say whether or not the
I don't know if that's
was
true. And, certainly if there's a minor child involved, before you can move to another state, you've got to get the permission of the court that entered the judgment of dissolution.
Okay.
You cannot do that. It's a no-no.
Yeah. So I'm curious now. Where's the kid?
Because I know of a case where somebody moved to Texas, and one of the conditions of allowing the wife to move to Texas was that she would pay the expenses of travel between Texas and Florida several times a year to visit the father.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, you've got to get the permission so that the details can be worked out.
So there may even be a little more to that case.
There
than
may be
just-
more to that.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so going back to our topic of the day, but call with any other questions you have, that's fine. Mitt Romney says he refused preferential release from prison and torture. I don't know if all of you are aware of what went on, but certainly we most of us know that John McCain was a prisoner of war during the Vietnam War in North Vietnam, stayed in the so-called Hanoi Hilton, and was tortured quite seriously. In fact, up until his death, he was unable to, as I heard, comb his own hair, put on his own jacket. One of his arms just didn't work that way. He was subjected to extraordinary abuse and literally gave name, rank, serial number, date of birth. And there came a point in time, I don't know how long into the 5.5 years that he was a prisoner of war, but they realized who they had. And who did they have? They had the son of an admiral and the grandson of an admiral. They had a high-value prisoner. And they wanted to curry favor with the U.S., so they offered John McCain the opportunity to go home. Wow. Honestly, folks, I don't know if I would have had the fortitude to say no. In fact, I'll be candid, I think I might have said yes. John McCain said no. He said, I have not been here the longest. The prisoner who has been here the longest is the first to go home. And unless you send him home, I'm not cooperating.
Is that like a military rule or something?
I don't know if it's a rule.
I don't know what are the rules
I don't know if it's a rule
of keeping people captive.
or if it's code, or if it's just was his sense of right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe some of you, if you were in the military, may know the answer to that. I don't. But certainly whether it was code and he honored it, or whether it was his sense of what's right and wrong, it was a tremendous sacrifice, potentially fatal. And, I was talking to my son yesterday, and we were talking about, a topic everybody talks about from now and again. Why do bad things happen to good people? And it's hard to give answers to that. And, we go into a little bit of faith, and ask a rabbi follows ask a lawyer. But there's never an answer. And one of the things I said to him is something that, people have said to me, and, it's not always helpful, but it's you never know what the plan is. You never know whether what you suffer will somehow make something better down the road. There are parents, just here in Parkland, who lost their children and who stormed the Florida legislature and demanded legislation. There are parents who have got legislation on all sorts of things, Megan's Law, all sorts of things that have their child's name attached to it, that they would not have done if not for their child's loss. Is it worth it? No, frankly, I don't think it is. Not personally. But from the greater societal sense, perhaps. So what John McCain suffered as a prisoner of war for 5.5 years, it is possible, I think probable in part, it's what made him who he was. I mean, he was already pretty much there if he was saying no, I'm not going home. But when he came back and, he extolled cooperation, he extolled doing what's right, and he respected the other side's beliefs even if he didn't agree with them. And let's be honest, John McCain wasn't a saint. Even Lindsey Graham, when he talked about it, he wasn't a saint. He had a temper. But John McCain also knew how to say, I'm sorry. So, you get the good with the bad. Nobody's a saint. And while we're all remembering and honoring John McCain, and talking about the wonderful aspects of his personality, his character, and what he's accomplished, no, he wasn't a saint. So then when Mitt Romney says, extolling the ascendancy of the first black president who had just defeated him, well, we all know what he's talking about. We're talking about a very famous concession speech that John McCain gave when he had lost the election to Barack Obama. And he accepted defeat gracefully. He pledged to work with President Obama where he could. He acknowledged that President Obama was his president. May have been one of the most gracious concession speeches in history. And at a time of racial division, very necessary to try to bring the country together. That concession speech will go down in history. There are other speeches in our nation's history that are famous. Can't think of one offhand that's a concession speech, but I do remember when Patrick Henry, well, I wasn't there, but I remember reading and learning when Patrick Henry said, "Give me liberty or give me death." And I remember, blanking now, it wasn't Patrick Henry, but the one who said, to effect, "I may not agree with what you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it." Understands the First Amendment perfectly. Instead of shutting down talk, the idea was to allow the marketplace of ideas, and junk would fall by the wayside, falsity would fall by the wayside, and truth eventually would emerge. Maybe that's a little naive, but for the most part, that's what our framers hoped would be true. So now, let's go a little bit to some of what, it was a very long eulogy. So let's go to some of what Vice President Biden said the other day. And he was a very good friend of Senator McCain's. They became really buddies. And you got to know that Senator Biden's son, Beau, died of the same thing that Senator McCain died of, and the same thing that Senator Edward Kennedy died of. And when Senator McCain was diagnosed, he and Joe Biden had, according to Joe Biden and according to Senator McCain, had many long talks. Anyway, Vice President Biden said, "People don't think much about it today, the McCain Code, but imagine having already known the pain you were likely to endure and being offered the opportunity to go home, but saying no. As his son can tell you in the Navy, last one in, last one out. I guess maybe it is a code, or maybe it's part of the Uniform Code of Military Justice." And Vice President Biden says, as a young man, he came up to my house, and he came up to Wilmington, and out of this grew a great friendship that transcended whatever political differences we had or later developed. Because above all, we understood the same thing. All politics is personal. It's all about trust. I trusted John with my life, and I would, and I think he would trust me with his. And as our life progressed, we learned more. There are times when life can be so cruel, pain so blinding, it's hard to see anything else. And he went on to speak about that's when that trust is needed. If you've destroyed that trust, you're not going to get it back when the hard times are hard. Vice President Biden then spoke about Senator McCain's character. Everybody's speaking about his character. Character is destiny. John had character. While others will miss his leadership, passion, even his stubbornness, he spoke to the family. You're going to miss that hand on your shoulder. Family, you're going to miss the man, faithful man as he was, who knew you and would literally give his life for you. And Senator Biden said, I'm sure if my former colleagues who worked with John, I'm sure there's people who said to you, not only now, but the last 10 years, explain this guy to me, right? Explain this guy to me. Because as they looked at him, in one sense they admired him. In one sense, the way things changed so much in America, they looked at him as if John came from another age, lived by a different code, an ancient, antiquated courage, integrity, duty that was alive. That was obvious how John lived his life. The truth is, John's code was ageless, is ageless. When you talked earlier, speaking about another speaker, you talked about values. It wasn't about politics with John. He could disagree on substance, but the underlying values that animated everything John did, everything he was, came to a different conclusion. He'd part company with you if you lacked the basic values of decency, respect, knowing this project is bigger than yourself. And he went on to say, John's story is an American story. It's not hyperbole. It's the American story, grounded in respect and decency, basic fairness, the intolerance through the abuse of power. That's who John was. He could not stand the abuse of power wherever he saw it, in whatever form, in whatever ways. He loved basic values, fairness, honesty, dignity, respect, giving hate no safe harbor, leaving no one behind, and understanding Americans were part of something much bigger than ourselves. And then as Vice President Biden continued, he spoke to those who were listening and asked them to think about how they and how John McCain approached various projects, issues. And he said, think of how he approached every issue. The ideals that Americans rallied around for 200 years, the ideals of the world has prepared you. Sounds corny. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain rights. To John, Vice President Biden said, those words had meaning, as they have for every great patriot who's ever served this country. And then Vice President Biden moved on to more modern days, unfortunately, where things have changed. Acknowledging that this is not the way the Senate or Congress generally operate these days. It's not the way we operate individually. And he spoke about that change. And he said, that's when things began to change for the worse in America and in the Senate. That's when it changed. What happened was at those times it was always appropriate to challenge another senator's judgment, but never appropriate to challenge their motives. When you challenge their motive, it's impossible to get to go. If I say you are doing this because you're being paid off, or you're doing this because you're not a good Christian, or you're doing this or the other thing, it's impossible to reach consensus. Think about it in your personal lives. All we do today is attack the opposition of both parties. Their motives, not the substance of their argument. This is the mid-90s. It began to go downhill from there. The last day John was on the Senate floor, what was he fighting to do? He was fighting to restore what you call regular order. Just start to treat one another again like we used to. And I'm going to, if I have time, talk about what Senator McCain said. But I want to try to finish up with what Vice President Biden had to say. He said, look, I've been thinking this week about why John's death hit the country so hard. Yes, he was a long-serving senator with a remarkable record. Yes, he was a two-time presidential candidate who captured the support and the imagination of the American people. And yes, John was a war hero, demonstrated extraordinary courage. But I don't think it fully explains why this country has been so taken by John's passing. I think it's something more intangible. I think it's because they knew John believed so deeply and so passionately in the soul of America. He made it easier for them to have confidence and faith in America. His faith in the core values of this nation made them somehow feel it more genuinely themselves. His conviction that we as a country would never walk away from the sacrifice generations of Americans have made to defend liberty and freedom and dignity around the world. It made average Americans proud of themselves and their country. His belief, and it was deep, that Americans can do anything, withstand anything, achieve anything. It was unflagging and ultimately reassuring. This man believed it so strongly. His capacity that we truly are the world's last best hope, the beacon to the world. There are principles and ideals more than ourselves worth sacrificing for, and if necessary, dying for. Americans saw how he lived his life that way, and they knew the truth of what he was saying. I just think he gave Americans confidence. And Vice President Biden obviously had a lot more to say, but that sort of sums it up. And so,
In true Uncle Joe fashion.
well, that's right. And,
Yeah.
I'll be honest, look, I'm Democrat. I wish that Joe Biden had the opportunity to have become president, or at least to have run, like Senator McCain.
Yeah.
I
think he'd be president today had he ran.
Maybe. They say Senator McCain may be the only two-time loser running for president that is so revered. It's because he handled himself. And he never achieved that final thing he wanted to achieve, being president. He wanted it. And Joe Biden will never achieve it, I don't think. And I'm not sure if he wanted it. But I think he would have made a great president because, like Senator McCain, I think that while he believed in democratic values, more liberal values, I still believe that he believed in humanity, in right and wrong, in fundamental fairness and decency. And I think that's the way people would have been treated. And when that comes from the top, it helps go a long way towards improving the country.
Well, Joe Biden is a traditional blue dog Democrat, which is much closer to what John McCain is as a Republican. They're not that far. They're not that different.
Well, I was looking at one of those spectrum charts the other day, and they are. Joe Biden was a little further left than McCain was right. McCain was a little bit more moderate. Mm-hmm. He was a conservative, mm-hmm. but a little bit more moderate. If he was running for office for the first time today, I don't think he'd have a chance, unfortunately. It's just not the way it is. You can't be a moderate Republican anymore.
What about Joe Biden?
I think he could win a Democratic primary if he's running for senator or something. I don't know. It depends on the state. Delaware.
I mean, with what's going on with these primaries and the folks that are getting the nod, they're really far left.
This is what all these folks are talking about,
mm-hmm.
and it's what
mm-hmm.
Senator McCain was talking about as well. And he gave a short farewell letter that he wrote, knowing that he was going to be passing
mm-hmm.
away.
Mm-hmm.
But he also gave a famous speech on the floor of the Senate on a very controversial issue, and I won't get into the politics. When he came back from surgery to vote on the initial effort to repeal so-called Obamacare, and the Senate Majority Leader and the rest of the Republican caucus thought he was coming back to be the 50th vote in favor, so that then the vice president could vote in favor and be 51. And they were shocked when he voted no. But he gave a speech before that, and It's a long speech, but I'm only going to do very little parts. He said, I've been a member of the United States Senate for 30 years. I've had another long, if not as long, career before I arrived here. Another profession that was profoundly rewarding, and in which I had experiences and friendships that I revere. But make no mistake, my service here is the most important job I have had in my life. I have known and admired men and women in the Senate who played much more than a small role in our history. True statesmen, giants of American politics. They came from both parties and from various backgrounds. Their ambitions were frequently in conflict. They held different views on the issues of the day, and they often had very serious disagreements about how best to serve the national interest. But they knew that however sharp and heartfelt their disputes, however keen their ambitions, they had an obligation to work collaboratively to ensure the Senate discharged its constitutional responsibilities effectively. And Senator McCain went on, the most revered members of this institution accepted the necessity of compromise in order to make incremental progress on solving America's problems and to defend her from her adversaries. Now, that word incremental speaks volumes to me. A lot of people complain, we can't pass this legislation. It doesn't achieve everything we want. Does it achieve anything you want? Pass the legislation. Come back next term and try to make it a little bit better, and a little bit better. The Civil Rights Act was not passed in one session. People were very unhappy that certain titles of the Civil Rights Act were excluded initially. They passed what they could pass. And when they had the vote, they went back and tried for more. Senator McCain is saying, I believe, I'm sure, compromise where possible. Achieve what can be achieved now. Don't throw it all out because you can't get your way completely. Senator McCain actually went on to say, our deliberations today, not just our debates, but the exercise of all of our responsibilities, are more partisan, more tribal, more of the time than any other time, at this time than any other time I can remember. And then he goes back to the concept of incremental progress. He speaks it better than I do. And then he achieved, 35 years in the Senate. He says incremental progress compromises that each side criticize, but also accept. Just plain muddling through to chip away at problems and keep our enemies from doing their worst isn't glamorous or exciting. It doesn't feel like a political triumph, but it's usually the most we can expect from our system of government, operating in a country as diverse and quarrelsome and free as ours is. Now, I can tell you something I tell every client before we go into a mediation. We will not settle if you think you have to be victorious. Because if you have to be victorious, the other side will say no. You will not settle if they feel they have to be victorious. In mediation, cases settle because both of you get as much as you can, depending upon the strength of the case, of what you want. Give up some of what you really don't want to give up. And hopefully walk out of mediation grumbling. I tell my clients that it's a good settlement if they agree to it and they walk out grumbling. Now, sometimes we do achieve phenomenal victories, okay? It's rare. But
do they say, wow, I'm glad that's over?
They do. but my clients who are more sober, more, thinking about what's going on, truly understand that you can't get everything, even if you're entitled to it. You want everything? Go to trial. And guess what?
You might not get anything.
You might not get anything, and you might pay a lot of attorney's fees. Settlement is exactly what it means. It's compromise. You don't compromise more than you believe appropriate, but you compromise to the extent you can.
Well, even without the monetary part of it, settlement means this is done.
Right.
It's over.
That's what every mediator tells everybody at mediation. He says, this is your chance to settle your own dispute. If you don't do it, you'll get 6 people that you don't know, and while your attorneys will do the best to try to pick the best 6, you don't know who you're going to get or who's going to be called that day for jury duty. So if you want to make sure you're somewhat satisfied, settle it yourself.
As cynical as the public is becoming, is it harder and harder to do a jury trial?
No. No, it's not.
I mean, that sounds. You used to think, oh yes, I'll be judged by a group of my peers. Now you're going, do I want those people to decide?
Well, legally they are your peers, but you're right. You're right.
Because people have changed.
I mean, I may have a trial where, I don't want anybody who owns their own business. I may not be. I mean, even with the peremptory challenges I get, and with trying to strike people for cause, I may end up with people who own their own business on the jury. 1, 2, 3. But even one might sway the jury back in the jury room. You can't guarantee the kind of jury you're going to get.
Right. And
it's why more than 90% of all civil cases settle before trial. People may not be happy, but they settle. And look, this is what Senator McCain was saying, applying it to legal mediation. But he's applying it to Congress. You've got to give the other side something of value. And you've got to accept incremental progress. Come back again another day. Don't let people yell at you, you didn't accomplish the whole cookie. You only gave us half a cookie. Be patient, have your milk. We'll go for the other half of the cookie, 2 years. Maybe you'll get a quarter cookie then.
Or just some crumbs.
Well, maybe. Depending on who's in power. But the point is, if you get that half a cookie,
you want half a cookie.
You got half a cookie. You got, if it's legal rights, it doesn't matter what it is, folks. It could be the budget. It could be civil rights for those who are transgender. It could be anything. You need incremental progress. It's very rare that you get complete, destruction. Anyway, John McCain then continued during that very famous speech on the floor of the Senate. And he says, I hope we can again rely upon humility, on our need to cooperate, on our dependence on each other to learn how to trust each other again, and by so doing better serve the people who elected us. Stop listening to the bombastic loudmouths on the radio. Ooh, well, you ought to mean me. And television and the internet. To hell with them! That was John McCain. They don't want anything done for the public good. Our incapacity is their livelihood. Let's trust each other. Let's return to regular order. We've been spinning our wheels on too many important issues because we keep trying to find a way to win without help from across the aisle. And as he gets nearer to the end, and if we get nearer to the end, he says, what have we to lose by trying to work together to find these solutions? We're not getting much done apart. I don't think any of us feels very proud of our incapacity. Merely preventing your opponent from doing what they want isn't the most inspiring work. There's greater satisfaction in respecting our differences, but not letting them prevent agreements that don't require abandonment of core principles. Agreements made in good faith that help improve lives and protect the American people. The Senate is capable of that. We know that. We've seen it before. I've seen it happen many times. And the times when I was involved, even in a modest way, with working out a bipartisan response to a national problem or threat, are the proudest moments of my career, and by far the most satisfying. And he says, I think the last part, yes, is we are servants of a great nation. A nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. More people have lived free and prosperous lives here than any other nation. I heard that speech as he delivered it on C-SPAN with no commentary. Wait for later for the commentary.
Mm-hmm.
You know, back in high school and college, when I did public speaking, you know, I took famous speeches, and some of them you repeat verbatim and you try to do them really well with the intonation and everything. Some of them you do what's called a rhetorical criticism. I would have grabbed this speech in a heartbeat. This may be one of the best speeches ever given. It was long, but you have to get the excerpts. But everything he said was a model, a guide, a blueprint towards actually making Congress something that functions. And now, in the very little time I have left, very little, he wrote a goodbye letter to the American people. And I'll just read a very small part of it. I've tried to serve our country honorably. I've made mistakes, but I hope my love for America will be weighed favorably against them. 10 years ago, I had the privilege to concede defeat in the election for president. I want to end my farewell to you with the heartfelt faith in Americans that I felt so powerfully that evening. I feel it powerfully still. Do not despair of our present difficulties, but believe always in the promise and greatness of America, because nothing is inevitable here. Americans never quit. We never surrender. We never hide from history. We make history. And that was the conclusion of his farewell letter to the nation. As the gentleman is preparing literally to die, I'm sure he had lots of things to consider and did consider a lot of things, including his family. But he also considered the American people. That is a statesman. We need more of them. On both sides. We need people to act, not just to say. We will return next week to more legal topics, although this really was, because without legislation in Congress, we get nowhere. I have nothing to litigate if I don't have laws. So join us again next week on Friday at 10:05 for Ask a Lawyer. As always, I encourage your questions. I enjoy your questions. I hope when there are no questions, you're listening rabid at the radio. Until next Friday, have a great holiday weekend. This is Stuart Address for Ask a Lawyer.
This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.